The rain poured down in a relentless torrent, soaking through my tattered coat as I stepped out onto the slick pavement of New York City. Each droplet felt like a reminder of the distance between me and the life I once knew. I clutched my worn purse tightly to my chest, my heart thudding in rhythm with the raindrops that cascaded around me. The gleaming lights of the upscale restaurant ahead flickered like a mirage, a world of opulence that felt impossibly out of reach. As I approached, I couldn't help but feel the weight of my appearance, grimy, aged, and forgotten, against the polished facade of the establishment. "Tonight is the night," I whispered to myself, trying to summon some courage. Memories of Scott, my son, filled my mind. The little boy who used to run into my arms was now a man I barely recognized, estranged and lost to me. But I had a reservation. I had to believe that meant I belonged there, at least for a fleeting moment. As I stepped through the glass doors, I was immediately enveloped by the hum of laughter and clinking glasses. The luxurious interior was a stark contrast to my reality, with chandeliers dripping crystal and patrons dressed in designer clothes. I felt eyes on me, sharp and judgmental, but I pressed forward, my heart racing. "Reservation?" a young receptionist asked, her voice laced with indifference as she barely glanced up from her screen. The disdain in her tone cut deeper than the cold rain outside. "Yes, it's under Mary." I hesitated, my voice faltering. "Smith." She finally looked up, her expression one of barely concealed contempt. "I see it. Right here," she said, her fingers tapping dismissively on the keyboard. "But—" She paused, leaning closer as if to scrutinize my every wrinkle. "You do realize this is an upscale establishment, don't you?" My cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but I forced a nod. "I understand. Right. Enjoy your evening," she said, waving me off as if I were a pesky fly. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. I walked further into the restaurant, the laughter and chatter buzzing around me like a swarm of bees. Each step felt heavier than the last, the judgmental glances from well-dressed diners weighing me down. I spotted Scott at a table in the corner, surrounded by friends, their laughter ringing in my ears. My heart raced at the sight of him, the man he had become, a stranger in many ways. "Scott," I whispered under my breath, taking a tentative step closer. I wanted to call out to him, to bridge the chasm that had formed between us, but the sight of his confident demeanor made me hesitate. Would he even recognize me? The thought sent a chill through me. I remembered the last time we spoke, the words I had said that had driven us apart. "I just want to help you, Scott," I had pleaded, but all that had earned me was his anger and a slammed door. Suddenly, one of his friends caught sight of me, a smirk playing on his lips as he whispered something to the others. Laughter erupted around their table, and I felt my heart sink. I turned away, mortified, and my eyes caught the reflection of myself in a nearby mirror. The woman staring back wore the marks of time and hardship, a stark contrast to the glamour around her. Maybe this was a mistake, I muttered, my voice barely audible over the din. But deep down, I knew I had to try. If not for me, then for him. I took a deep breath, gathering my resolve. This was my son, and I had to reach out, had to bridge the gap, no matter how daunting it felt. As I stood there, the cacophony of the restaurant faded into the background, and all I could think about was the boy who once looked at me with love in his eyes. "I'm still your mother," I whispered to myself. Perhaps tonight would be the night I could finally reconnect, that I could finally tell him how much I missed him. But first, I had to muster the courage to take that first step towards him, to face whatever judgment awaited me. I took a deep breath as I approached Scott's table, my heart pounding in my chest. The noise of laughter and clinking glasses faded into a dull roar, as I focused on the familiar face of my son, who sat surrounded by his friends. With trembling hands, I pulled the faded photograph from my purse, the edges worn and frayed from countless moments of longing. In it, Scott was no more than 6 years old, his bright smile lighting up the picture, a stark contrast to the shadows that now loomed over us. "Scott," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but he didn't seem to hear me. I stepped closer, my heart racing with hope. "Scott, look!" I offered the photograph to him, my hands shaking. He glanced at it, a flicker of recognition passing across his features, but just as quickly, he turned away, dismissing me as if I were a mere annoyance. "Can you believe this?" he said, rolling his eyes, turning his back to me completely. His friends laughed, oblivious to the pain that pierced my heart, feeling the humiliation wash over me like the relentless rain outside. I retreated toward the entrance, my spirit crumbling with each step. The laughter of the diners echoed in my ears, a cruel reminder of how far I had fallen. I stood just inside the door watching as they continued to mock my appearance, their voices dripping with disdain. "Look at her," one of them sneered. "What's she doing in a place like this?" I fought back tears, the memories of Scott as a child flooding my mind. I remembered the way he would run into my arms after school, the way he would laugh at my silly jokes, and the warmth of his small body curled up next to me on cold winter nights. "I'm still here," I whispered to myself, wishing he could hear me, wishing he could see beyond the tattered clothes and the worn face that time had carved into my skin. Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me. I turned slightly, and there was a young couple, their eyes wide with sympathy. "Hey, don't let them get to you," the woman said softly. "You have every right to be here." "Thank you," I managed to reply, my voice thick with emotion. As they walked away, I felt a tiny flicker of hope, but it was quickly extinguished by the weight of my reality. I looked back at Scott's table, and he was laughing with his friends, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the chandeliers above. I felt invisible, a ghost haunting the remnants of a life I once held dear. I stood there, drenched and defeated, as the rain continued its relentless assault outside. The droplets slid down the glass door, mirroring the tears that threatened to spill from my own eyes. I thought of the countless nights I spent wondering where I went wrong, how the love I once shared with my son had turned to silence and resentment. Just then I caught a glimpse of Scott looking back at me. For a brief moment our eyes met, and I saw something in his gaze, perhaps guilt, perhaps confusion. But before I could grasp it, he turned away again, succumbing to the pressure of his friends' laughter. My heart sank further. "Mom, is that you?" I imagined him saying, but the words never left his lips. Instead, I felt the crushing loneliness of being a mother who had lost her way, standing alone in a world that felt foreign and unwelcoming. With a heavy heart, I stepped back into the rain, letting the cold droplets wash over me, hoping to cleanse the pain that clung to my skin like a second layer. I was once a woman with dreams and hopes, a mother who had fought fiercely for her child. Now, I was just a shadow, drifting through a life I barely recognized, searching for a way back to the love that once defined me. As I stood there, shivering and lost, I realized I had to find the strength to fight for that love once more, even if it meant facing the ghosts of my past. The rain continued to fall, but inside me, a small fire began to flicker, a determination to not give up on the bond I once shared with Scott. As I trudged away from the restaurant, my heart felt heavy, like lead weighing down my chest. The rain poured relentlessly, each drop a reminder of the rejection I had just faced. I wrapped my tattered coat tighter around me, wishing I could disappear into the shadows of the city. The lights of New York twinkled like distant stars, inviting yet mocking me with their brightness. I felt like a ghost haunting my own memories, a specter of the woman I once was. I wandered aimlessly, my thoughts swirling like the rainwater pooling at my feet. What had I done to deserve this estrangement? I had tried to reach out, to bridge the chasm that had formed between Scott and me. And yet here I was, a pariah in a world that once held me close. The laughter of diners echoed in my mind, a chorus of disdain that cut deeper than any storm. Why did you even think he would want to see you? I muttered to myself, bitterness creeping into my voice. I kicked a small stone, watching it skitter across the pavement. I used to be someone important, a mother, a friend. But now, I felt like an afterthought, a relic of a past that had been swept away. Suddenly, the sound of music broke through my thoughts. I paused, looking toward the corner of the street where a street musician strummed his guitar, pouring his soul into the melody. The notes floated through the air, weaving a tapestry of emotions that resonated deep within me. I approached cautiously, drawn by the warmth of his music. "Beautiful," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The musician looked up, a smile breaking across his face. "Thank you. I try to play from the heart. It's the only way to connect, you know," he replied, his fingers dancing along the strings. "I used to connect," I confessed, my voice trembling slightly. "But now, it feels like everything is broken." He nodded, his gaze understanding. "Life has a way of throwing us off course, but you can still find your way back." I fished out a few coins from my purse and dropped them into his open guitar case. "I'm not sure I even know where to start," I admitted, feeling the weight of my words. "Sometimes you just have to tell your story," he encouraged, leaning closer. "Every scar tells a tale, and those tales can heal." His words ignited a flicker of hope within me. Perhaps I could find the courage to confront my past, to face Scott once more. The thought of returning to that restaurant filled me with trepidation, but I could no longer let fear dictate my choices. "Thank you," I said, my heart racing with renewed determination. "You've given me something to think about." As I turned to leave, the musician called after me, "Remember, it's never too late to rewrite your story." With those words echoing in my mind, I made my way back towards the restaurant, the rain still pouring but feeling less like a shroud and more like a cleansing. Each step felt lighter, as if I were shedding the weight of my past failures. I had come this far. I owed it to myself to at least try to reach out to Scott again. The restaurant loomed ahead, its bright lights contrasting starkly against the dreary night. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever might come next. I pushed the door open, the warmth inside enveloping me like a long-lost embrace. The patrons were still mingling, laughter and conversation rolling over me like waves. I spotted Scott sitting at a table, oblivious to my presence, and my heart ached at the sight. He looked so carefree, surrounded by friends. I wanted to call out to him, to make him see me, but fear held me back for a moment longer. But then, I remembered the musician's words. I had a story, and it was time to share it. I took a step forward, my resolve hardening. I would confront my past, not just for Scott, but for myself. I was tired of being a ghost. I wanted to be seen, to be heard. As I walked further into the restaurant, my breath hitched with anticipation, and I knew that whatever happened next, I was ready to face it head on. As I stepped back into the restaurant, the warmth and the faint sound of clinking glasses enveloped me, a stark contrast to the cold rain still dripping from my clothes. My heart raced as I searched for Scott, my son. The tables were still adorned with white tablecloths and glimmering silverware, but I barely noticed the opulence surrounding me. I was on a mission, and my eyes were set on finding him. I scanned the room and my heart sank when I discovered that Scott's table was empty. I felt a wave of disappointment wash over me, but I couldn't give up now. I noticed Opie, the restaurant owner, bustling about, checking on guests, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and approached him. "Excuse me, Opie," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't look up right away, busy adjusting a napkin on one of the tables. "Opie, It's me, Mary. Finally, he glanced up, his expression shifting from indifference to slight confusion. Yes? Can I help you? He asked briskly, the look in his eyes suggesting he wasn't quite ready for a heartfelt reunion. It's about Scott, I continued, my heart pounding in my chest. I'm his mother. I've come to see him. Opie blinked at me for a moment, and I could see the gears turning in his head, but he quickly dismissed me. I'm sorry, ma'am, but this is not the place for— Please! I interrupted, desperation creeping into my voice. I just want to talk to him. I've waited so long. He opened his mouth to respond, but just then a family across the room erupted in laughter, their joy piercing through my heart like a dagger. I turned to look at them, and the sight of their warmth reminded me of the times I had shared with my own family, back when Scott was just a child. I felt a wave of longing crash over me, and my throat tightened as memories flooded back. The birthday parties, the holiday dinners, the way he would run to me with open arms. Mommy, look at my cake, he'd shout, his face adorned with frosting, and I'd laugh, wiping his cheeks clean while he grinned ear to ear. I shook my head, trying to push those thoughts aside. I needed to be strong. Turning back to Opie, I said, I know he's here. I just want a moment with him. Please. Opie's face softened for just an instant, but then he hardened again. I can't allow that, he said, his tone firm. It's best if you leave. Defeated, I stepped away, my heart heavy. I felt the stares of the patrons boring into me, their judgment palpable. I noticed a couple at the nearby table, their eyes wide with curiosity as they whispered to each other. I could almost hear their thoughts. What was an old woman like me doing here? Feeling the heat of their scrutiny, I turned away, my heart aching. I wanted to scream, to tell them that I was more than the tattered clothes I wore, more than the sadness that clung to me like the damp fabric against my skin. But instead, I found myself looking toward the family celebrating a milestone, their table adorned with balloons and a cake that sparkled with candles. As they cheered and hugged, I felt a tear slide down my cheek, and I quickly wiped it away, not wanting anyone to see my vulnerability. The laughter reminded me of what I had lost, what I desperately wanted back. In that moment, something shifted within me. I couldn't let fear hold me back any longer. I needed to speak, to share my truth. With newfound determination, I cleared my throat and turned to the crowd. "Excuse me, everyone," I called out, my voice trembling. A few heads turned towards me, and I took a step forward, feeling the weight of their eyes on me. "I know I may not look like much," I began, my heart racing, "but I am a mother. I've sacrificed everything for my son." The chatter quieted, and I could see some patrons leaning in, their interest piqued. "I've made mistakes, and I've hurt the ones I love. But tonight, I'm here to face my past and to find my son." My voice wavered as I continued. Every mother has a story, filled with love and regret. I want to share mine. As I spoke, I felt a shift in the room. Some people exchanged glances, and a few nodded empathetically. My heart raced as I shared my story, my struggles, the choices that led to our estrangement, and the love that had never faded, even through the years of silence. I poured my soul into each word, hoping against hope that somewhere in this lavish restaurant Scott could hear me. Being a mother is the most challenging and rewarding thing I've ever done. It's a journey filled with joy and sorrow, and at times it feels like you're losing everything you hold dear. But I never stopped loving my son. As I looked around, I saw eyes glistening with tears, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. But still, the void left by Scott's absence loomed large. I hoped desperately that he would walk through those doors and recognize the woman who had once held him close, the one who had loved him fiercely despite the distance. The air was thick with unspoken words as I finished my story, my heart pounding in my chest. The restaurant was momentarily quiet, my raw vulnerability hanging in the air like a delicate thread. I could see the faces of the patrons soften, some even leaning in, enchanted by the tale of a mother's love and sacrifice. It felt like a tiny victory, a fleeting moment where I was more than just a ragged figure in tattered clothes. Just then, the heavy doors swung open, and Scott stepped in, his laughter trailing behind him like a lost echo. I caught a glimpse of him before he fully entered, his presence striking a chord in my heart. My breath hitched as I watched him pause, a flicker of recognition flashing across his face as he caught the tail end of my words. But just as quickly he shook his head, brushing off the moment as if it were nothing more than a passing thought. "Is that—" I heard a voice from the back, but before I could gather the courage to call out to him, he turned away, rejoining his friends who were blissfully unaware of the storm brewing within me. My heart sank, a heavy weight pressing against my chest. Why was it so hard for him to see me? Opie, the restaurant owner, finally pulled himself away from the chaos of the evening and approached me, his brow furrowed in curiosity, and for a fleeting moment, our eyes locked. There was something in his gaze, perhaps confusion, or even recognition, but it quickly faded as he took in my disheveled appearance. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but distant. "Opie, please," I implored, my voice trembling as I stepped closer. "It's me, Mary, your mother." His expression morphed into disbelief, but I pressed on, desperation clawing at my throat. "I've been searching for you, for Scott. I just want a chance to explain, to reconnect." "Mary?" he echoed, but it was as if the name was foreign to him. I could see the gears turning in his mind, the memories of a past he had long buried. "I don't understand. You've been gone so long." "I know," I whispered, feeling the sting of regret. "But I'm here now. Please, can you help me talk to him?" Before he could respond, I caught sight of Scott again, lingering at the edge of the crowd, his laughter mixing with the clinking of glasses and the soft murmur of conversations. He looked so comfortable, so carefree, and I felt a pang of longing. How had it come to this? I had once held him in my arms, nurtured every dream he had. Now, he was a stranger, a silhouette of the son I once knew. "Scott," I called out, my voice louder than I intended. Heads turned, and the moment hung in the air. I could see him stiffen, his eyes darting to me, confusion swirling in their depths. "Mom, don't," he said under his breath, but it was too late. The shock rippled through the room, and I could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on me again. "Just listen," I pleaded, my heart racing. "I've missed you every single day. I want to share my life with you again, just like before." For a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of something in his gaze, perhaps vulnerability or recognition. But it was quickly swallowed by the laughter of his friends, and he turned away again, leaving me standing there, exposed and alone. Opie stepped back, looking conflicted as he watched the scene unfold. "Mary, I don't know what to say," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just give me a chance," I urged, my voice cracking. "I can't lose him again." As I stood there, my heart racing and my mind racing with memories of our past, I realized that this was more than just a plea for connection. This was about redemption, about healing the wounds that had festered for far too long. And even if Scott couldn't see it now, I had to believe that one day he would understand. With each moment that passed, the distance between us felt insurmountable. Yet I clung to the hope that somehow, some way, I would bridge that gap. I had to try, for both our sakes. As I stood in the dimly lit restaurant, the air thick with tension and disbelief, my heart raced. The flickering lights sent a shiver down my spine, drawing my attention away from the biting remarks of the patrons and back to my son, Scott. I had come here to reconnect, to show him that I was still his mother, that my love for him had never waned, despite the years of silence that had stretched between us like an unbridgeable chasm. But just as hope began to swell within me, the world around us erupted in chaos. A figure burst through the main entrance, dark and menacing, yelling for everyone to get down. "This is a robbery! Hand over your wallets and watches!" The panic in the room was palpable, and the laughter that had once filled the air turned into terrified gasps. My instincts kicked in, my heart racing not just for myself but for those around me. I saw a small child clinging to his mother, eyes wide with fear. Without thinking, I moved toward them, my old body propelled by a surge of maternal instinct that had never truly left me. "Get down! It's going to be okay," I shouted, my voice trembling yet filled with a fierce protectiveness. I knelt beside the child, shielding him with my body as the thief waved a gun around, demanding valuables. My heart pounded in my chest, but I focused on the small boy, whispering soothing words that I hoped would calm him. "You're safe. I won't let anything happen to you." In that moment of chaos, I caught a glimpse of Scott, frozen at the entrance. His eyes were wide, locked onto me, disbelief etched into his features. I could see the realization dawning in him, the flicker of recognition ignited by my actions. But before he could move toward me, the thief's voice boomed again, and I felt a rush of fear. I was terrified, yes, but the instinct to protect overshadowed it all. The situation escalated, and just as quickly as it had begun, a cacophony of sirens filled the air. The police had arrived, and the thief, overwhelmed by the unfolding chaos, turned to flee. His escape was short-lived, as officers swiftly apprehended him, their shouts echoing through the restaurant. As the adrenaline began to fade, I turned to see Scott rushing toward me, confusion and worry etched into his face. "Mom," he whispered, the word hanging in the air between us like a long-lost melody. Tears filled my eyes as I took in his familiar features, now tinged with the weight of adulthood and all its burdens. "Scott," I breathed, my voice cracking. I thought I'd lost you." He stepped closer, his eyes darting over my face, searching for the mother he had cast aside. "What are you doing here?" His question was laced with a mix of anger and concern, but I could see the vulnerability beneath it. "I came to find you," I replied, my heart racing as I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. "I wanted to apologize for everything. I've missed you so much." Tears streamed down my cheeks, and I could see the conflict within him. But as I took a deep breath, the weight of years of regret spilling out, something shifted. The restaurant patrons, who had been mere spectators, now watched intently, their faces reflecting a myriad of emotions. "Forgiveness," I said softly, "is a powerful thing." Scott hesitated, glancing around at the crowd, their eyes filled with empathy and support. The applause began slowly, hesitant but growing louder as people recognized the moment unfolding before them. "Mom," he finally said, voice trembling, I don't know if I can just forget everything." "And you don't have to," I replied, my heart swelling as I reached out to take his hands in mine. "But we can start anew. We can heal together."